September the 30th, 1207, and died on the 17th of December in 1273. But I'd like you to put him in context because he is so different from what we normally know about the world, about personages, about great saints and celebrities. Remember this, he is born just about 15 years after Saint Francis is born, all right? So he's kind of going to be a contemporary of him. The same time that Rumi is operating in Western Asia, shall we say, in Tajikistan, in Uzbekistan, in what is now called Turkey, these other people are doing their things in the world. So Thomas Aquinas is born 18 years after Rumi is born, and he becomes a pillar of Catholicism and great theology. Meister Eckhart, one of the great mystics of Christian tradition, is born 13 years before Rumi dies. And also at the same time that Rumi is alive, the Crusades are going on all throughout his life. I mean, from the day he's born until the day he dies, the Crusades are operative, if you will, in history. They are plundering non-Christian communities. They are committing atrocities in the name of Christ. There are some people who really do believe that the Crusades are a good thing. The wreak taking, if you will, as if it was ever theirs in the first place, of the Holy Land, and all of that is happening. The other thing that is important for us to understand about Rumi is two different empires that we know, or I don't know very much about, but I learned a lot about in a trip to Turkey. The Seljuk Empire that lasted approximately, I think, 150 years, and that was supplanted by a bunch of other things. And then the Ottoman Empire, which under the banner of Islam and also just dominance of the Ottoman leadership, overtook a good portion of the whole Middle East and other portions of Eastern Europe. So, and even went so far as to do battle into the middle part of Europe. So I want to cast also back to about the 7th century. Rumi is born in the 13th century, and his appearance happened 700 years after the emergence of an expression of Islam called Sufism, or Sufi Islam, all right? And it is kind of understood to be Islamic mysticism. It is not Islamist as we use that word in popular culture now, but I think all of that helps us frame what Rumi is about and what he can mean for us. Rumi is born on the 30th of September. His father, Bahauddin Walad, is a theologian, a jurist, he's a mystic, he's a teacher, he has followers, and his mother, Mumina Khatun. And there's nothing special in terms of the biography or the hagiography about him that displays that he was any more prescient and gifted or genius than anybody else, but he does come under the influence of his father. And so you can circle his name as a big influence on his life. And I'll point out two others to point out that have big impacts on him during his life. They're fleeing the Mongols. I don't know what part of history is more dangerous, treacherous, or fearful to live in. We're all going to go see, I'm sure, or many of us will see the Oppenheimer movie, and it'll quicken within us a great trepidation about atomic warfare and what it could mean. And Oppenheimer thought he had blood on his hands and regretted that he had ever fulfilled the creation of the atomic bomb. But there are Mongols and Ottoman empires and crusades and atomic specters, atomic holocaust. All of these things attend almost the entire journey of the human race. And Rumi was no different, fleeing the Mongols. Attar is a famous mystic Persian poet, and he met him, came under his influence a little bit. You could circle his name. In March of 2017, when he's basically 9.5 years old, he makes the Hajj with his family to Mecca, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And we'll get to that in a little bit later in the description of Rumi as a very observant Muslim. His mother dies in 22. He marries his first wife and settles in Konya. And by the way, you know all about Konya, you just don't know the name of that city. In the New Testament, Konya is called Iconium, and it was a place where Christians hung out, and it's listed, I believe, in the book of Acts. So it's not foreign to us, but it is known as Konya now. And in Anatolia, which is in the western section of the Seljuk Empire, which is now Turkey. A couple of his sons are born to his first wife and him. Then his father gets a teaching position in Konya, and Rumi's wife dies, and he marries Kira Khatun. Then in 1231, he inherits his father's teaching position. Burhan al-Din comes to town, befriends him and teaches him the rudiments then of Sufism. Rumi is teaching and preaching all across this area in mosques and halls, etc. Then on November the 15th, by the way, you can circle Burhan al-Din, his name as well. But then one of the most significant encounters of his life happens, and that's on November the 15th in the 44th year of the 13th century, 1244. Shams al-Din of Tabriz, a wandering dervish, arrives in Konya. And dervish can mean a lot of things. It can mean mostly, or it does mean mostly, an initiate or a person who's kind of on probation, not fully licensed yet. I don't mean to belittle the term, but it means not just a beginner, but somebody who's trying to go down a road where they can become not just competent, but a champion of their endeavor. In this case, it would be Islam. Hassam al-Din Hassan inspires Rumi to begin composing poems. This is apparently a kind of innate gift that Rumi has, and how he composes or writes ghazals, that's a particular kind of Persian poem, is very interesting. He teaches and preaches at countless mosques again, and then Shams is murdered. Shams is perhaps murdered by Rumi's own son, who out of jealousy does this dastardly deed. In 1262, at the age basically of 54, 55, he begins composing what he titles Masnavi, which is a huge 6-volume work, mostly of poems, and it's long. It's apparently not written by his own hand, but he speaks these poetic couplets and longer poems, and his students take down every word he utters and commits it to inscription, and then thereafter they begin to be published. He dies on the 17th of December in 1273 in Konya. He's buried there, and eventually Mevlana mausoleum, which is known now, becomes a shrine. And Mavlana, by the way, basically means master or teacher or guide, or lord, trustee, guardian, helper. It's an honorific to pay great tribute to this person who had an impact on the world and created a movement. So in 2005, the United Nations gives him the great grace of proclaiming the Mevlevi Sama ceremony. And I know that that's a lot of words we normally don't hear and maybe don't understand. But Mevlevi means whirling dervish, and it's a particular order of Sufi religion. And the Sama ceremony is what you will see in a video, or you'll see a portion of the Sama ceremony. And the Sama basically means listening. But if you could raise up the slide a little bit on the screen, Brent, I can't. I didn't. Oh, I'll read it out. The UN declared that this Sama ceremony is among the masterpieces of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. Just absolutely a great tribute. And they're doing a ceremony. They're not doing the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. They're not doing the pyramids. It's not a big object in space. It's not a monument. It's a ceremony, a practice by which greater union with humanity and with God can be achieved. I just thought I'd show you some of these depictions, visual depictions, and also an example of the Masnavi book. It's very different to our eye. This is not normally the kind of painting or illumination that we see. On the left is a depiction by an Iranian artist in 1957 of what Rumi might have looked like. In the middle is an Ottoman era manuscript, and that means that's from the 15th century on. This is old, but it's, 200-300 years after Rumi had lived and died and left his legacy to the world. And this thing in the middle, the depiction in the middle, shows Rumi and Shams and their meeting. And then this is the cover of the book from a 15th century manuscript of Rumi's great work. Next slide. On the upper left is the ruins of Rumi's family home in the Balkh province. Now, remember, this is 700 years ago, right? Because this is the 13th century when he lived, and it's still remembered, it's still honored, and there is a multi-million-dollar endeavor to preserve this family home of Rumi. I was telling Brent, everybody kind of wants to claim Rumi. Everybody, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Russia, Turkey, of course, and also Afghanistan. In the upper right-hand corner is Rumi's tomb in Konya, and it is venerated and followed, and pilgrims are there every day of the year at all times of the day and night, and they are beautiful. I can't remember the name of this. This is an odd aside, but at Rumi's tomb, which I was privileged to visit with a delegation of Emmanuel Cleaver, Myron McCoy, Wallace Hartsfield, Randall Jefferson, myself, Priscilla went. We were able to see, I think, the Ibrahim, that's not a sect, it's a group of people that have a genetic distinction of having these piercingly green eyes. This was made famous on the cover of National Geographic many, many years ago. And then subsequently, they've done a kind of a 50-year retrospective of where that woman is now, et cetera, et cetera. This is a group of people, though, that have this genetic distinction, and it's beautiful, and it was stunning. And I remember meeting that woman at right there by Rumi's tomb. If we can go back one more, go back to the previous slide. And then the tomb is kind of in this complex of buildings and this shrine of Rumi's, but also this was where Rumi taught. It was kind of like a seminary, and it would please a place where people would come and become devotees of his version of Islam and become part of the Mevlevi whirling dervish expression of Islam. Next slide. This is how big Rumi is in kind of popular culture. Stamps are made in his image in Afghanistan and also Turkey. Tajikistan, they've got this in Katlan, I think it's, I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. I apologize for any Tajikistanis, but a new statue that's been erected in the last 10 years. There's a bronze sculpture of Rumi in Russia with 3 other wise men there in Kaluga region. And then in Izmir, in a place called Buka, Izmir is one of the provinces of Turkey. There's this statue that is 75.5 feet. We say 23 meters, and we're so anti-metric that we say, well, what does that mean in feet? Well, it's 75.5 feet tall statue and honoring of Rumi. It would be not unlike a Lincoln Memorial or a Washington Monument. This is how important Rumi is in the Turkish culture. So, well, what's so great about Rumi, and how important is he? Well, he is the inspiration for the Mevlevi order of Sufis, better known as the whirling dervishes of Sufism. And they, by the way, they go on tour and have been to Kansas City, seen them, and it is wonderful to watch them do their thing. And it's like watching a worship service if you really, really pay attention to their affect and their presentation of what they're doing. And this abides into the 21st century, not only in Turkey, but around the world. Next slide. How important is Rumi? Well, he's important as a poet for sure. And in 2002, 2005, but also 2014, he's regarded in at least American print media as the best-selling poet in the U.S. He sells more books of poems than Shakespeare, more books of poems than Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver usually is seen as second behind Rumi. His poetry established him as an extraordinary voice for goodness and an inspirational source for spiritual seekers of all kinds and sorts around the world. What's so important about Rumi? Well, he really is, when you read his words and you understand the context of them, a very faithful and observant Muslim. Now, what kind of Islam did he follow? He followed Sunni Islam. There's 2 basic forms plus Sufism. There's Sunni and there's Shia, and that has made for great consternation and wars and death as these 2 factions have vied for dominance around the world. But also Sufism, to me, is almost like a third branch of Islam. And the 5 pillars of Islam: praying 5 times a day, fasting, observing holy days, making the Hajj to Mecca, and the regular practice of almsgiving, Rumi did to a fare thee well, and practiced them faithfully throughout his life. And that was a bequest from his father, who was a great teacher, theologian, jurist, if you will, and also taught the rudiments of Islam to his son and his mother as well. What's so important about Rumi? Well, he really does lift up, and he does this through his poetry, the establishment of the Mevlevi order of Islam, of Sufism, the mystical way for Islam. And I've used the graphic from that article in The Nation, A Powerful Antidote to Terrorism. And he encounters the mystical interpretations of the Quran by Ali ibn Abi Talib. He doesn't encounter his cousin, but the interpretations of Muhammad's cousin and successor, which form the basis for the Sufi expression of Islam, and thereafter becomes one of the most renowned exponents of Sufism. Rumi's emphasis on compassion cannot be stressed enough. He had compassion for all human beings. He was described by people who observe him and write it down and then pass this around during his lifetime, even in the 13th century, as being almost overly tender, overly compassionate to every person he met. And you see this depicted in this little painting of him, almost demure, almost deflecting any kind of attention. This garnered him admiration and adulation, not only among adherents of Islam, but also among followers of the world's major religions. One more thing about the importance of Rumi is this literary legacy. His most esteemed book, it goes by different transliterations of what we hear in our English speaking ears into English, but it's from Persian, and it can be Mathnawi or Masnavi or Mesnavi, and it's a poem, 6 volumes, by the way, 25,000 couplets. And by the way, these were apparently not written and inscribed by Rumi himself, but he spoke them as they came to him, and his students wrote them down. By the way, Sama means listening. The Sama ceremony is listening. And I want to remind you of something that we surveyed and took in from Mary Oliver. Do you remember that she said that prayer is a room you enter in order to hear another voice? Remember that. I think we did Mary Oliver, didn't we, Brent?
Yes.
Yeah. And prayer being a room that we enter to hear another voice, not merely to say a prayer. And by the way, I'm on a big campaign to revive really good pastoral prayers. I'm afraid that we've gotten away from them and discipled them, and we need better pastoral prayers where people are really praying and not lecturing. And but prayer in its essence for the individual is not only utterance or thinking or pondering or ruminating, it's listening. And you might want to think about that. And by the way, if we can go back to the very, very first slide. Oh, right there, that's fine. We could, yeah, to the very first slide at the very top. The very first one, I want to show you the Mevlevi on the right has his one hand positioned in attention to the heavens or to God, and the other hand is positioned down. Even if both arms are raised, and you may have seen this in the depiction of the Sema ceremony that we just watched, that one hand will be turned up and one hand will be turned down, even when both arms are up. And this is to convey, transfuse, if you will, the presence of God, the meaning of God's love and care for the world from above to the earth, and it's both an attention to the divine and an attention to humanity. Okay, thanks. We can go back. So we're on to the literary, and the next slide. I tried to kind of make this real simple. What would Rumi's foundational principles be? Well, one of them is love. There's no doubt about it. Love as the bridging dynamic between the human and the divine, both human romance, love between people who care for each other and want to have a bond into the future, but also devotion to God. There is a spirit in Rumi, and certainly a practice in Sufism, of inclusion. Rumi represented a spirit of inclusion in his thinking and religious practices. His sensitivity about the integrity and validity of other faith perspectives is seen in the many times that he references Jesus and Moses and Jesus's family, Joseph and Mary. And by the way, you should know that the most venerated location for Mary, the mother of Jesus, is in Turkey, which is apparently where Mary, and if we believe the tradition, the beloved apostle John took flight to, if you will, and where she finally had her final earthly days. And there's Mary's house in Turkey that you can visit, and literally Muslims visit it, Christians visit it, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, the Quran mentions Mary more than the New Testament does, and that's very interesting to me. At any rate, when Rumi died in Konya, and I don't know exactly how this was determined, or whether he put it in a will, or whether his family thought this was good, or his followers thought it would be required, but 5 different faiths carried his funeral bier around in this procession in Konya. And the third foundational principle is the possibility of mystical union with God. His meeting and then his subsequent friendship with Shams, or I say Shams, it may be Shams, led him into a very deep appreciation of the emotional or the affective sustenance that can come from the Sama ceremony, listening. And from then on, he believed whirling meditation could render a practitioner closer to the heart of God and God's loving will for the world. But I thought you should say with me, or I'll say them, you don't have to say them, but I want you to hear me recite some of Rumi's famous words. These are more popularized and remembered as being the epitome of Rumi's poetic achievements. Under the general theme of abiding in the presence of God, he used this metaphor of the flute. By the way, you'll remember when we looked at Tagore, Tagore also had this flute imagery. We are the flute. Our music is all thine. He's praying to God here. We are the mountains, echoing only thee. Just, if you just said that out loud and pondered its meaning for your life, I think you would be blessed. But there's also the theme of trusting in the provision of God. Rumi wrote a poem, I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? And if you were to think this, and by the way, those of us over retirement age begin to think a little bit, when you got less days ahead of you than you do behind you, you begin to think about these things, but you begin to ponder too, well, God has taken care of me all along the way, hasn't God? Why won't God take care of me beyond this moment? By the way, just a very brief meditation. I've tried to do this in trying to comfort people who've lost a loved one. when you were in your mother's womb, you breathed liquid, by the way. You didn't breathe. You had, the human equivalent of gills. You got sustenance, you got life, but you were breathing liquid. And then you got thrust into a world by the natural progress of how humans come to be. I mean, you were forced to begin breathing gas, oxygen. Just think of that. And by the way, if you had had the will to stay in your mother's womb, who wouldn't want to stay? You got room service, you got a protective environment, no cares at all. You always feel comfortable. And then you're thrust into a world where you get cold, where you step on nails. But oh, look what the world presents. Peanut butter, ice cream, baseball, the Kansas City Chiefs football team in 2022. You get all these beautiful things, a church home, a congregation. And would any of us want to go back to the womb? No. Well, when we are born into whatever is next, and nobody's come back with a videotape of what it looks like, who knows what we will breathe? We moved from liquid to gas. Maybe we will breathe color. Maybe we will be sustained by electricity or something that we have no idea. But then we could utter Rumi's words, why should I fear? When was I ever less by dying? And then another thing I think that we can find from Rumi's poetic and prayerful words is knowing our unity with humanity and God. He writes, we are all the same, longing to find our way back to the one, back to the only one. By the way, Sufism sometimes has been critiqued as not monotheistic enough. Well, it's just not orthodox enough. It's open to a lot of interpretations, but it is monotheistic. And that little those three lines there should point us to the monotheistic thrust of Rumi and also Sufism and even the Mevlevi order of Sufism.